Alright, now we at paper 74. Adam and Eve. Tell me this ain't them. Adam and Eve arrived on Urantia from the year AD 1934, 37,848 years ago. As a side, anytime they date back, especially specifically when they give specific dates, they date back from 1934. That's when these papers started arriving, so to say. 1934. Man hadn't even stepped foot in space. Adam and Eve arrived on Urantia from the year AD 1934, 37,848 years ago. It was in mid-season when the garden was in the height of bloom that they arrived. At high noon and unannounced, the two seraphic transports, accompanied by the Jerusalem personnel entrusted with the transportation of the biologic uplifters to Urantia, settled slowly to the surface of the revolving planet in the vicinity of the temple of the Universal Father. They're telling you some angels. Two angels brought Adam and Eve in their personality form, so to say, down to this planet, and they settled slowly to the surface in the temple of the Universal Father in the garden that had been built. All the work of rematerializing the bodies of Adam and Eve was carried on within the precincts of this newly created shrine, and from the time of their arrival, 10 days passed before they were recreated in dual human form for presentation as the world's new rulers. They regained consciousness simultaneously. The material sons and daughters always serve together. It is the essence of their service at all times and in all places, never to be separated. They are designed to work in pairs. Seldom do they function alone. Part 1. That was just the opening paragraph. Adam and Eve. Part 1 is Adam and Eve on Jerusalem. So this is before they came down here. The planetary Adam and Eve of Urantia were members of the senior core of material sons on Jerusalem, being jointly number 14,311. They belonged to the third physical series and were a little more than 8 feet in height. At the time Adam was chosen to come to Urantia, he was employed with his mate in the trial and testing physical laboratories of Jerusalem. For more than 15,000 years, they had been directors of the division of experimental energy as applied to the modification of living forms. Long before this, they had been teachers in the citizenship schools for new arrivals on Jerusalem. And all this should be borne in mind in connection with the narration of their subsequent conduct on Urantia. When a proclamation was issued calling for volunteers for the mission of Adamic adventure on Urantia, the entire senior core of material sons and daughters volunteered. The Melchizedek examiners, with the approval of Lanaforge, who is the new system sovereign after Lucifer. Lanaforge replaced him, and he's the sovereign, the system sovereign of Satania. The Melchizedek examiners, with the approval of Lanaforge and the Most Highs of Edentia, again, that high order of being from our constellation, finally selected the Adam and Eve who subsequently came to function as the biologic uplifters of Urantia. Adam and Eve had remained loyal to Michael during the Lucifer rebellion. Nevertheless, the pair were called before the system's sovereign and his entire cabinet for examination and instruction. The details of Urantia affairs were fully presented. They were exhaustively instructed as to the plans to be pursued in accepting the responsibilities of rulership on such a strife-torn world. They were put under joint oaths of allegiance to the Most Highs of Edentia and to Michael of Salvington, Salvington being the capital of Nebadon, our local universe, that Michael rules. You know that now. And they were duly advised to regard themselves as subjects to the Urantia Corps of Melchizedek receivers until that governing body should see fit to relinquish rule on the world of their assignment. So basically the Melchizedeks have taken over, in a sense, this planet ever since the Caligastia did what he did. And when he went into darkness, they eventually came down here and kind of took over. This Jerusalem pair left behind them on the capital of Satania and elsewhere 100 offspring, 50 sons and 50 daughters, magnificent creatures who had escaped the pitfalls of progression and who were all in commission as faithful stewards of universe trust at the time of their parents' departure for Urantia. And they were all present in the beautiful temple of the material sons, attendant upon the farewell exercises associated with the last ceremonies of the bestowal acceptance. Check it. This is a big deal. They were chosen. This particular Adam and Eve that came to our planet were chosen from a lot of different material sons and daughters. They've been vetted and everything. They're well aware of they're well aware of the rebellion, the Caligastia betrayal, and they know that, in short, this is a fucked up planet that they're going to. And it's a big deal because they about to leave for a long time. And they were all present in the beautiful temple of the material sons, attendant upon the farewell exercises associated with the last ceremonies of the bestowal acceptance. These children accompanied their parents to the dematerialization headquarters of their order and were the last to bid them farewell in divine speed as they fell asleep in the personality lapse of consciousness, which precedes the preparation for seraphic transport. I'm sorry. Let me read that again because I want to expound on that. These children accompanied their parents to the dematerialization headquarters of their order and were the last to bid them farewell in divine speed as they fell asleep in the personality lapse of consciousness, which precedes the preparation for a seraphic transport. Their children saw them off at what they call the dematerialization headquarters of their order. They're not coming to our planet, Urantia, as they are up on high in Jerusalem. Whatever material form that they occupy in Jerusalem, they kind of disintegrate somehow or another. And the essence of this being outside of the flesh is transported down here by angels, is what they basically just said. The children spent some time together at the family rendezvous, rejoicing that their parents were soon to become the visible heads, in reality, the sole rulers of planet 606 and the system of Satania. Again, this is a big deal. They've been sent to the world and nothing's going to be higher than Adam and Eve when they get here. And the custody of the world is going to be in their hands. And thus did Adam and Eve leave Jerusalem amidst the acclaim and well-wishing of its citizens. They went forth to their new responsibilities, adequately equipped and fully instructed concerning every duty and danger to be encountered on Urantia. Part 2. Arrival of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve fell asleep on Jerusalem, and when they awakened in the Father's temple on Urantia, in the presence of the mighty throng assembled to welcome them, they were face to face with two beings of whom they had heard much, Van and his faithful associate Amadon. These two heroes of the Caligastia succession were the first to welcome them in their new garden home. Man, just think, man, Van and Amadon, they stayed down, bro. Like they was here for like 150,000 years trying to do right, trying to hold things down, trying to keep hope alive. Some shit, man. The tongue of Eden was an Andonic dialect as spoken by Amadon. Again, Andon being the first man, and Amadon was from that line. So, and Amadon is the one, stay down. So the tongue of Eden was an Andonic dialect is spoken by Amadon. Van and Amadon had markedly improved this language by creating a new alphabet of 24 letters. And they had hoped to see it become the tongue of Urantia as the Edenic culture was spread throughout the world. That was the plan. Adam and Eve had fully mastered this human dialect before they departed from Jerusalem, so that this son of Andon heard the exalted ruler of his world address him in his own tongue. Essentially, an alien is speaking to Amadon in a language he helped develop. Damn. And on that day, there was great excitement and joy throughout Eden as the runners went in great haste to the rendezvous of the carrier pigeons assembled from near and far, shouting, "Let loose the birds, let them carry the word that the promised son has come." Hundreds of believer settlements had faithfully, year after year, kept up the supply of these home-reared pigeons for just such an occasion. As the news of Adam's arrival spread abroad, thousands of the nearby tribesmen accepted the teachings of Van and Amadon, while for months and months pilgrims continued to pour into Eden to welcome Adam and Eve and to do homage to their unseen father. Soon after, soon after their awakening, Adam and Eve were escorted to the formal reception on the great mound to the north of the temple. This natural hill had been enlarged and made ready for the installation of the world's new rulers. Here, at noon, the Urantia Reception Committee welcomed this son and daughter of the system of Satania. Amadon was chairman of this committee, which consisted of 12 members embracing a representative of each of the six Sangheat races. The acting chief of the Midwayers, Anan, a loyal daughter and spokesman for the Nadites, Noah, the son of the architect and builder of the garden and executive of his deceased father's plans, and the two resident life carriers. So this is like the committee that's who welcomed them. The next act was the delivery of the charge of planetary custody to Adam and Eve by the senior Melchizedek, chief of the council of receivership on Urantia. The material son and daughter took the oath of allegiance to the Most Highs of Norlashadek, our constellation, and to Michael of Nebadon, and were proclaimed rulers of Urantia by Van, who thereby relinquished the titular authority which for over 150,000 years he had held by virtue of the action of the Melchizedek receivers. This was a huge day in the life of our planet. This was essentially a real coronation, a divine coronation took place. And they're passing over all authority to Adam and Eve. And this, again, was almost 38,000 years ago. And Adam and Eve were invested, let me see. Yeah. And Adam and Eve were invested with kingly robes on this occasion, the time of their formal induction into world rulership. Not all of the arts of Dalmatia had been lost to the world. Weaving was still practiced in the days of Eden. So basically, they're telling them they had some fly robes on. Then was heard the archangel's proclamation, and the broadcast voice of Gabriel decreed the second judgment roll call of Urantia and the resurrection of the sleeping survivors of the second dispensation of grace and mercy on 606 of Satania. Every so often, every so few thousand years, pretty much, they wake up the dead. This is the resurrection that takes place, is what they're saying happened on this day as well. Like, this is a major day in the history of our planet. And so the dispensation of the prince has passed. The age of Adam, the third planetary epoch, opens amid scenes of simple grandeur, and the new rulers of Urantia start their reign under seemingly favorable conditions, notwithstanding the worldwide confusion occasioned by lack of the cooperation of their predecessor and authority on the planet. Part 3. Adam and Eve learn about the planet. And now, after their formal installation, Adam and Eve became painfully aware of their planetary isolation. Check this out, man. Silent were the familiar broadcasts, and absent were all the circuits of extraplanetary communication. Man, I really wonder what that sound like and what goes on up there. You know what I'm saying? But essentially, their first night here is like they came here without their phones. I mean, that's the best way to put it. Like, all the information they're used to receiving from broadcast and all types of communication, they just don't have no more on this isolated planet. Silent were the familiar broadcasts, and absent were all the circuits of extraplanetary communication. Their Jerusalem fellows had gone to worlds running along smoothly with the well established planetary prince and an experienced staff ready to receive them and competent to cooperate with them during their early experience on such worlds. But on Urantia, rebellion had changed everything. Here, the planetary prince was very much present, and though shorn of most of his power to work evil, he was still able to make the task of Adam and Eve difficult and to some extent hazardous. It was a serious and disillusioned son and daughter of Jerusalem who walked that night through the garden under the shining of the full moon, discussing plans for the next day. Thus ended the first day of Adam and Eve on isolated Urantia, the confused planet of the Caligastia betrayal, and they walked and talked far into the night, their first night on Earth, and it was so lonely. Mm. Skewed. It's a lot to read, and I do a lot of reading. I mean, of course, you can read along as well. It's paper 74. But this is the way it's explained. It's pretty straightforward, but I want to read a lot. Let's see. Adam's second day on Earth was spent in session with the planetary receivers in the advisory council. From the Melchizedeks and their associates, Adam and Eve learned more about the details of the Caligastia rebellion and the result of that upheaval upon the world's progress. And it was, on the whole, a disheartening story, this long recital of the mismanagement of world affairs. They learned all the facts regarding the utter collapse of the Caligastia scheme for accelerating the process of social evolution. They also arrived at a full realization of the folly of attempting to achieve planetary advancement independently of the divine plan of progression, and thus ended a sad but enlightening day, their second on Urantia. So they got the rundown and the real detail and nuance behind the Caligastia betrayal and what they was really up against. And it was pretty sobering to them, even though they knew what they was getting into beforehand, just, the details magnified. The third day was devoted to an inspection of the garden. From the large passenger birds, they call them the fandors, Adam and Eve looked down upon the vast stretches of the garden while being carried through the air over this, the most beautiful spot on earth. Did you hear what they just said? They're flying large passenger birds. Now, that's pretty much a scientific fact that there were some flying huge birds from the, dinosaur age, so to say. And so this was 30 some thousand years ago. Hey, This day, this day of inspection ended with an enormous banquet in honor of all who had labored to create this garden of Edenic beauty and grandeur. And again, late into the night of their third day, the son and his mate walked in the garden and talked about the immensity of their problems. This is already starting to weigh in on them. Like, man. On the fourth day, Adam and Eve addressed the garden assembly. From the inaugural mount, they spoke to the people concerning their plans for the rehabilitation of the world and outlined the methods whereby they would seek to redeem the social culture of Urantia from the low levels to which it had fallen as a result of sin and rebellion. This was a great day, and it closed with a feast for the council of men and women who had been selected to assume responsibilities in the new administration of world affairs. Take note, women as well as men were in this group, and that was the first time such a thing had occurred on earth since the days of Dalmatia. It was an astounding innovation to behold Eve, a woman, sharing the honors and responsibilities of world affairs with a man, and thus ended the fourth day on earth. The fifth day was occupied with the organization of the temporary government, the administration which was to function until the Melchizedek receivers should leave Urantia. So basically, they really just getting their affairs in order because the Melchizedeks are passing over everything to them. The sixth day was devoted to an inspection of the numerous types of men and animals. Along the walls along the walls eastward in Eden, Adam and Eve were escorted all day, viewing the animal life of the planet and arriving at a better understanding as to what must be done to bring order out of the confusion of a world inhabited by such a variety of living creatures. It greatly surprised those who accompanied Adam on this trip to observe how fully he understood the nature and function of the thousands upon thousands of animals shown him. The instant he glanced at an animal, he would indicate its nature and behavior. Adam could give names descriptive of the origin, nature, and function of all material creatures on sight. Those who conducted him on his tour of inspection did not know that the world's new ruler was one of the most expert anatomists of all Satania, and Eve was equally proficient. Adam amazed his associates by describing hosts of living things too small to be seen by human eyes. Whatever he was presented with, he knew it because Adam had long served in pretty much a scientific capacity in Jerusalem before he came down here. like thousands upon thousands of years. He was an expert in anything they showed him, as well as Eve. When the sixth day of their sojourn on earth was over, Adam and Eve rested for the first time in their new home in the east of Eden. The first 6 days of the Urantia adventure had been very busy, and they looked forward with great pleasure to an entire day of freedom from all activities. But circumstances dictated otherwise. The experience of the day just passed, in which Adam had so intelligently and so exhaustively discussed the animal life of Urantia, together with his masterly inaugural address and his charming manner, had so won the hearts and overcome the intellects of the garden dwellers that they were not only wholeheartedly disposed to accept the newly arrived son and daughter of Jerusalem as rulers, but the majority were about ready to fall down and worship them as gods. They blew their mind. Like Adam and Eve came down here and blew their minds. And it's understandable. Part 4, the first upheaval. That night, the night following the sixth day, while Adam and Eve slumbered, strange things were transpiring in the vicinity of the Father's temple in the central sector of Eden. There, under the rays of the mellow moon, hundreds of enthusiastic and excited men and women listened for hours to the impassioned pleas of their leaders. They meant well, but they simply could not understand the simplicity of the fraternal and democratic manner of their new rulers. And long before daybreak, the new and temporary administrators of world affairs reached a virtually unanimous conclusion that Adam and his mate were altogether too modest and unassuming. They decided that divinity had descended to earth in bodily form, that Adam and Eve were in reality gods, or else so near such an estate as to be worthy of reverent worship. The amazing events of the first 6 days of Adam and Eve on earth were entirely too much for the unprepared minds of even the world's best men. Their heads were in a whirl. They were swept along with the proposal to bring the noble pair up to the Father's temple at high noon in order that everyone might bow down in respectful worship and prostrate themselves in humble submission. And the garden dwellers were really sincere in all of this. Again, like Adam and Eve blew their minds to such a point that they just reckoned that they were gods, and they not. They just material sons and daughters. They're a lot higher than us, but they know so much, and their whole presence was, mind blowing to these primitive folks. Van protested. Madon was absent. Van was like, "Nah, don't y'all doing too much. They just material sons and daughters. They up there, but God, no." Amadon was absent, being in charge of the guard of honor which had remained behind with Adam and Eve overnight. But Van's protest was swept aside. He was told that he was likewise too modest, too unassuming, that he was not far from a god himself. Else, how had he lived so long on earth? And how had he brought about such a great event as the advent of Adam? And to the excited Edenites were about and as the excited Edenites were about to seize him and carry him up to the mount for adoration, Van made his way out through the throng and, being able to communicate with the midwayers, sent their leader in great haste to Adam. Damn. It was near the dawn of their seventh day on earth that Adam and Eve heard the startling news of the proposal of these well-meaning but misguided mortals. And then, even while the passenger birds were swiftly winging to bring them to the temple, the midwayers, being able to do such things, transported Adam and Eve to the Father's temple. Damn. It was early in the morning on the seventh day, and from the mount of their so recent reception, that Adam held forth in explanation of the orders of divine sonship, and made clear to these earth minds that only the Father and those whom he designates may be worshipped. Adam made it plain that he would accept any honor and receive our respect, but worship never. It was a momentous day, and just before noon, about the time of the arrival of the seraphic messenger bearing the Jerusalem acknowledgement of the installation of the world's rulers, Adam and Eve, moving apart from the throng, pointed to the Father's temple and said, "Go you now to the material emblem of the Father's invisible presence and bow down in worship of him who made us all and who keeps us living. And let this act be the sincere pledge that you never will again be tempted to worship anyone but God." They all did as Adam directed. Mm. So he told all of them, no, let's go to the temple. Let's bow down to this unseen Father who makes all this possible. The material son and daughter stood alone on a mount with bowed heads while the people prostrated themselves about the temple. Check it. And this was the origin of the Sabbath day tradition. Always in Eden, the seventh day was devoted to the noontide assembly at the temple. Long it was the custom to devote this day to self-culture. The forenoon was devoted to physical improvement, the noontime to spiritual worship, the afternoon to mind culture, while the evening was spent in social rejoicing. This was never the law in Eden, but it was the custom as long as the Adamic administration held sway on earth. Damn. So that's the start of a day of worship, is what they're saying. I don't know, man. It's fascinating. All right, now we on part 5. Adam's administration. For almost 7 years after Adam's arrival, the Melchizedek receivers remained on duty, but the time finally came when they turned the administration of world affairs over to Adam and returned to Jerusalem. The farewell of the receivers occupied the whole of a day, and during the evening, the individual Melchizedeks gave Adam and Eve their parting advice and best wishes. Adam had several times requested his advisors to remain on earth with him, but but always were these petitions denied. He he didn't want to go it alone. Like, he knew he was facing some shit. The time the time had come when the material sons must assume full responsibility for the conduct of world affairs. And so, at midnight, the seraphic transports of Satania, them angels who take people back and forth, planet to planet, realm to realm. And so at midnight, the seraphic transports of Satania left the planet with 14 beings for Jerusalem, back to the capital of Satania. The translation of Van and Amadon occurring simultaneously with the departure of the 12 Melchizedeks. So it was a group of 12 Melchizedeks here who was holding things down ever since really almost towards the beginning of the Caligastia betrayal. And they all went back and handed all authority over to Adam and Eve. It's on them now. All went fairly well for a time on Urantia, and it appeared that Adam would eventually be able to develop some plan for promoting the gradual extension of the Edenic civilization. Pursuant to the advice of the Melchizedeks, he began to foster the arts of manufacture with the idea of developing trade relations with the outside world. When Eden was disrupted, there were over 100 primitive manufacturing plants in operation, and extensive trade relations with the nearby tribes had been established. So they're saying by the time Adam and Eve commit their blunder, they had already established like a bunch of manufacturing plants in Eden in hopes to start trade relations with neighboring tribes and start to develop some sort of rapport. For ages, Adam and Eve had been instructed in the technique of improving a world in readiness for their specialized contributions to the advancement of evolutionary civilization. But now they were face to face with pressing problems, such as the establishment of law and order in a world of savages, barbarians, and semi civilized human beings. Aside from the cream of the Earth's population assembled in the garden, only a few groups here and there were at all ready for the reception of the Adamic culture. Bro, it was wild down here when Adam and Eve got here. Like outside the garden, it was chaos on this planet and wherever mankind was stationed at. Adam made a heroic and determined effort to establish a world government, but he met with stubborn resistance at every turn. Adam had already put in operation a system of group control throughout Eden and had federated all of these companies into the Edenic League. But trouble, serious trouble, ensued when he went outside of the garden and sought to apply these ideas to the outlying tribes. The moment Adam's associates began to work outside the garden, they met the direct and well-planned resistance of Caligastia and Dalagastia. So, damn, man, it's war for real. And Eden was like the home base for good in a sense. And Adam and Eve, but they had to export that culture. Like that was their that culture and their bloodline. Like that was what they were supposed to do. But outside the garden, they were met with resistance. And so basically Caligastia and Dalagastia was, I mean, just really throwing salt on the game in a major way. The moment Adam's associates began to work outside the garden, they met the direct and well-planned resistance of Caligastia and Dalagastia. The fallen prince had been deposed as world ruler, but he had not been removed from the planet. He was still present on Earth and able, at least to some extent, to resist all of Adam's plans for the rehabilitation of human society. Adam tried to warn the races against Caligastia, but the task was made very difficult because his arch enemy was invisible to the eyes of mortals. That's heavy. Even among the Edenites, there were those confused minds that leaned toward the Caligastia teaching of unbridled personal liberty, and they caused Adam no end of trouble. Always were they upsetting the best laid plans for orderly progression and substantial development. He was finally compelled to withdraw his program for immediate socialization. He fell back on Van's method of organization, dividing the Edenites, that's whoever's occupying Eden, into companies of 100 with captains over each and with lieutenants in charge of groups of 10. Adam and Eve had come to institute representative government in the place of monarchical, but they found no government worthy of the name on the face of the whole earth. For the time being, Adam abandoned all effort to establish representative government, and before the collapse of the Edenic regime, he succeeded in establishing almost 100 outlying trade and social centers where strong individuals ruled in his name. Most of these centers had been organized aforetime by Van and Amadon. Man, yo, they got a serious uphill battle. Adam and Eve do. They are trying to. I damn near feel them. You know what I'm saying? You trying to introduce something new and advance to a world full of savages. Damn near. Damn. The sending of ambassadors from one tribe to another dates from the times of Adam. This was a great forward step in the evolution of government. Um, I'm reading a lot through this because it is fairly straightforward, and that's just what I'm gonna do, man. Part 6, Home Life of Adam and Eve. The Adamic family grounds embraced a little over 5 square miles. Immediately surrounding this home site, provision had been made for the care of more than 300,000 of the pure line offspring, but only the first unit of the projected buildings was ever constructed. Before the size of the Adamic family outgrew these early provisions, the whole Edenic plan had been disrupted and the garden vacated. Basically, they had plans to produce a whole lot of offspring. That's what Adam and Eve was going to do. And their offspring was subsequently mate with uh, the races of man, like of humankind from our planet. But this whole entire idea was disrupted early. Adam's son was the firstborn of the violet race of Urantia, being followed by his sister and Eve's son, the second son of Adam and Eve. Eve was the mother of 5 children before the Melchizedeks left, 3 sons and 2 daughters. The next 2 were twins. She bore 63 children, 32 daughters, and 31 sons before the default. The default, they always refer to as what Adam and Eve, their whole mishap as the default. So before all this went astray, they're saying she had 63 children. When Adam and Eve left the garden, their family consisted of 4 generations numbering 1,647 pure line descendants. They had 42 children after leaving the garden, besides the 2 offspring of joint parentage with the mortal stock of earth. They're going to get into all this when in the actual default. Like, we ain't even got to when they actually, commit their blunder, so to say. The Adamic children did not take milk from animals when they ceased to nurse the mother's breast at 1 year of age. Eve had access to the milk of a great variety of nuts and to the juices of many fruits, and knowing full well the chemistry and energy of these foods, she suitably combined them for the nourishment of her children until the appearance of teeth. While cooking was universally employed outside of the immediate Adamic sector of Eden, there was no cooking in Adam's household. They found their foods, fruits, nuts, and cereals, ready prepared as they ripened. They ate once a day, shortly after noontime. Adam and Eve also imbibed light and energy. Excuse me. Imbibe, that means to pretty much drink in or take in. Adam and Eve also imbibed light and energy direct from certain space emanations in conjunction with the ministry of the tree of life. So not only did they eat regular fruit, nuts, and cereals from the earth, from the garden, but they also took in light and energy in a certain way that was just conducive to their order of being. The bodies of Adam and Eve gave forth a shimmer of light, but they always wore clothing in conformity with the custom of their associates. Though wearing very little during the day, at eventide they donned night wraps. The origin of the traditional halo encircling the heads of supposed pious and holy men dates back to the days of Adam and Eve. Since the light emanations of their body were so largely obscured by clothing, only the radiating glow from their heads was discernible. The descendants of Adamson always thus portrayed the concept of individuals believed to be extraordinary in spiritual development. So, they're saying the whole idea of a halo surrounding somebody's head came forth from Adam and Eve because their bodies gave off a light. And even though they were kind of covered in a few clothes, you could see this light emanating from their head. Adam and Eve could communicate with each other and with their immediate children over a distance of about 50 miles. This thought exchange was effected by means of the delicate gas chambers located in close proximity to their brain structures. By this mechanism, they could send and receive thought oscillations, but this power was instantly suspended upon the mind's surrender to the discord and disruption of evil. So when they committed that blunder, that power was cut off. They were reduced to the status of a mortal man like us by the time they committed that blunder. Anything supernatural associated with them, they no longer had access to, is what they're saying. And again, like they gonna get into it, bro. They really established backstory. This is exposition. The Adamic children attended their own schools until they were 16, the younger being taught by the elder. The little folks changed activities every 30 minutes, the older every hour, and it was certainly a new sight on Urantia to observe these children of Adam and Eve at play, joyous and exhilarating activity just for the sheer fun of it. It really said something right there. Adam and Eve, and their children were just on another level, and they came down to a planet where mortal man, like this savage, bro, he was real serious. He didn't laugh and joke a lot, is what they saying. He had no time for play. And Adam and Eve, the things they were involved in and just being of a higher order, introduced, in a sense, the whole idea of play. The play and humor of the present-day races are largely derived from the Adamic stock. The Adamites all had a great appreciation of music as well as a keen sense of humor. The average age of betrothal was 18, and these youths then entered upon a 2 year course of instruction in preparation for the assumption of marital responsibilities. At 20, they were eligible for marriage, and after marriage, they began their life work or entered upon special preparation therefor. The practice of some subsequent nations of permitting the royal families, supposedly descended from the gods, to marry brother to sister dates from the traditions of the Adamic offspring, mating as they must needs with one another. The marriage ceremonies of the first and second generations of the garden were always performed by Adam and Eve. So yes, that's what they saying, that Adam and Eve produced offspring, and these offspring eventually mated with each other And they had to, because they were going to keep this pure violet blood that they represented pure for a time period until it was time for them to spread into the rest of the world. And that's just how it go. 7. This is part 7, life in the garden. And I'm gonna skip around a little bit. But I'm gonna guess some of this is definitely interesting. The children of Adam, except for 4 years attendance at the Western schools, lived and worked in the east of Eden. They were trained intellectually until they were 16 in accordance with the methods of the Jerusalem schools. From 16 to 20, they were taught in the Urantia schools at the other end of the garden, serving there also as teachers in the lower grades. This is life in the Garden of Eden. The entire purpose of the Western school system of the garden was socialization. The forenoon periods of recess were devoted to practical horticulture and agriculture, the afternoon periods to competitive play. The evenings were employed in social intercourse and the cultivation of personal friendships. Religious and sexual training were regarded as the province of the home, the duty of parents. The teaching in these schools included instruction regarding 1, health and care of the body, 2, the golden rule, do unto others as you want others to do unto you, the standard of social intercourse, and this was introduced in the Garden of Eden. The relation of individual rights to group rights and community obligations, that's 3. 4, history and culture of the various earth races. 5, methods of advancing, improving world trade. 6, coordination of conflicting duties and emotions. 7, the cultivation of play, humor, and competitive substitutes for physical fighting. The schools, in fact, every activity of the garden were always open to visitors. Unarmed visitors were freely admitted to Eden for short visits. The sojourn in the garden, a Urantian had to be adopted. To sojourn, which is temporarily visit the garden, a Urantian had to be adopted. He received instructions in the plan and purpose of the Adamic bestowal, signified his intention to adhere to this mission, and then made declaration of loyalty to the social rule of Adam and the spiritual sovereignty of the universal Father. Like, you had to be vetted to get up in that garden, basically, to observe. This shit was real. So yeah, they basically go on to talk about some of the laws in Eden, like their moral codes and whatnot. Again, this paper is out there. You can check it out for yourself. It's a lot to read. So, and they also go into the time when they worship. This is just life in the garden. They're breaking down life in the garden. One thing I will say, Adam endeavored to teach the races sex equality. The way Eve worked by the side of her husband made a profound impression upon all dwellers in the garden. Adam definitely taught them that the woman, equally with the man, contributes those life factors which unite to form a new being. Before, mankind had presumed that all procreation resided in the, quote, loins of the father. They had looked upon the mother as being merely a provision for nurturing the unborn and nursing the newborn. Adam taught his contemporaries all they could comprehend, but that was not very much, comparatively speaking. Nevertheless, the more intelligent of the races of earth looked forward eagerly to the time when they would be permitted to intermarry with the superior children of the violet race. And what a different world Urantia would have become if this great plan of uplifting the races had been carried out. Even as it was, tremendous gains resulted from the small amount of the blood of this imported race which the evolutionary peoples incidentally secured. And thus did Adam work for the welfare and uplift of the world of his sojourn. But it was a difficult task to lead these mixed and mongrel peoples in a better way. I gotta be honest with you, man. Sometimes when they speak about mortal beings, it's they don't pull no punches, and they don't have the same like emotions and feelings that we have, and sometimes they speak in a real clinical way, and that's just what it is. Part 8, the legend of creation. And so we just told you how Adam and Eve came about. Like they just showed you what all that was about, as well as the Garden of Eden. So part 8, they're just breaking down how this became such a convoluted myth that people believe in to this day. I'm not gonna read all of it. I mean, I suggest you do if you're interested in it because it does get deep. I'm just gonna read a few things though. The story of the creation of Urantia in 6 days was based on the tradition that Adam and Eve had spent just 6 days in their initial survey of the garden. This circumstance lent almost sacred sanction to the time period of the week, which had been originally introduced by the Dalmatians. Adam spending 6 days inspecting the garden and formulating preliminary plans for organization was not prearranged. It was worked out from day to day. The choosing of the 7th day for worship was wholly incidental to the facts herewith narrated. In Dalmatia, they were the ones to introduce the 7-day week, and it was based on the lunar calendar. The legend of the making of the world in 6 days was an afterthought. In fact, more than 30,000 years afterwards, one feature of the narrative, the sudden appearance of the sun and moon, may have taken origin in the traditions of the one-time sudden emergence of the world from a dense space cloud of minute matter which had long obscured both sun and moon. The story of creating Eve out of Adam's rib is a confused condensation of the Adamic arrival and the celestial surgery connected with the interchange of living substances associated with the coming of the corporeal staff of the planetary prince more than 450,000 years previously. Now that was some right there. They pretty much are telling you their whole idea of us thinking Eve came from the rib of Adam, and that myth really took origin even longer before they even got him, because that was based on erroneous ideas about the Dalmatian 100 when the prince's staff came here and they had to impart the life plasm of some humans with the prince's staff. All that got mixed up into this whole, foggy legend about Adam and Eve and her coming from a rib and just this whole creation myth. And then they go on to kind of break down how this came to be in scripture, so-called scripture, over the years, how it really got to be that. But it's a lot of reading. It's interesting though. I'd admonish you to check it. We just gonna close out with this though. This is the last paragraph. The golden age is a myth, but Eden was a fact, and the garden civilization was actually overthrown. Adam and Eve carried on in the garden for 117 years when, Through the impatience of Eve and the errors of judgment of Adam, they presumed to turn aside from the ordained way, speedily bringing disaster upon themselves and ruinous retardation upon the developmental progression of all humanity. This was, at the end, it says, narrated by Salonia, the seraphic, quote unquote, voice in the garden. So what, let these papers tell it. This is that voice in the garden we're familiar with, if you're familiar with the whole idea of the story of Adam and Eve, just from a biblical standpoint. She's saying, I was there. That's some shit. To be continued.